How many times can these headlines rhyme like fine wine, sending goosebumps down thine spine? Resign, mine Valentine, no need to whine, for design is divine in Dragon Quest 9. I used to be a slam poet. When we started a new game in Dragon Quest 9, we opened to these words. Hello? Is there anybody there? If you're there, say something. Show yourself. Thus do the voices of the mortals plead, ever hopeful of proof of our existence. For how long have we watched over their realm? For how long have we celestrians existed? The word usage is a bit condescending, isn't it? The mortals plead and we watch over, la-dee-da. Well, that was you. You were a celestrian, a guardian angel for the mortal creatures on the planet below the observatory, your home. Along with their upturned noses at mortals, celestrians were bound by a strict hierarchy that prevented them from opposing their superiors. They protected their puny mortal charges in order to gain benevolence, an item they gave to the world tree Yggdrasil so that it would one day bear golden figs. And soon after you completed your apprenticeship under your master Aquila, it did, marking the end of the Celestrians' watch over the mortal realm. Until of course calamity struck by forces unknown, shaking the earth and throwing you off the observatory to the world below. Right off the bat, we were told exactly what this game was going to be about god complexes, about authority, and about what that means for either side of that dynamic. The Celestrians were set up to be these literal holier-than-thou types, so wrapped up in pecking order that it physically prevented them from going against it. Your descent to the land of the mortals in the fashion it happens is the stripping of that Celestrian superiority. You lost your wings, your halo, and because of the timing, the same people that were grateful to your invisible work as a guardian considered you a terrible omen that showed up with the earthquake. With the town suspicious of you, no status, and powerless to get back to the observatory, you experienced a total role reversal. You were the one in need of support, and from the same humans you looked down on as too weak to do anything themselves. That's right, you needed friends. Last time we talked about Dragon Quest VIII and how it was objectively the best game of all time. Do not write into the comments wherever they are at the current date you're watching this to debate me on it. I will not listen to you and may also possibly be dead. It was a commendable achievement for everyone involved, reasserting the series as a flagship title for powerful home consoles. It pushed the boundaries of what Dragon Quest was capable of, expanding on mechanics, dropping obsolete practices, and creating a quintessential single-player experience. And that's why Yuji Horii called upon the services of Akihiro Hino and his team at Level 5 once again to make the next Dragon Quest game a handheld title designed around multiplayer. I don't know why. Really? Why would you? What? I've become somewhat of a Dragon Quest Sherlock Holmes since starting this series, and that's a convenient way of saying I can be wrong about this, so don't take my word as gospel. Allow me to deduce why this happened. Dragon Quest has never done exceptionally well in the West, at least relatively compared to its Japanese audience. Do you see where I'm going with this? It may come as a shock to you if you're a big fan of Dragon Quest, but sales for any individual Dragon Quest game in the West had never exceeded roughly 650,000 copies compared to the overshadowing 4 million copies of Dragon Quest VII sold in Japan alone. With the exception of Dragon Quest VIII and the first Dragon Quest on the NES, none of the other games had surpassed 250,000 copies sold. After fans missing out on 2 entries in the franchise, a console shift, and a rough localization, Dragon Quest VIII came in and broke the first Dragon Warrior sales record in the States by almost triple the amount. That's huge. That's an opportunity to grow a global audience. To Square Enix, that meant appealing to a Western audience, and handhelds were growing ever more popular around this time back home anyway. So they took what is now the second best-selling console of all time, milked its multiplayer functionality, and you know what? It worked. Dragon Quest IX is the best-selling Dragon Quest game of all time, and the second best-selling Dragon Quest in every region outside of Japan, and it's intended to be a multiplayer experience. Dragon Quest IX had a ton of multiplayer features, including local co-op that let you and 3 other friends play the entire game from top to bottom together. And it was the good kind of co-op. You retained full control of your character and were able to travel to different areas than the host, even fight separate battles at the same time. With drop-in drop-out co-op, players were bound to be at different points in their own games. Level 5 needed to add features that would incentivize players to play earlier parts of the game with other people. They added respawning blue chests to dungeons and towns that guest players could open in the host's world. Be careful though, each of the blue chests have a chance to spawn a The overworld had alchemy materials to find in various regions that made splitting up a good idea. Playing with your friends was a fun way to discover items you might have missed in your own game, especially when they were wearing them. The multiplayer functionality inspired a character creator and bumped the visual aspect of characters' weapons and shields being rendered on their model in 8 to their entire set of equipment in 9. Pretty impressive stuff when you consider that each piece had 2 versions, one for each player character's model, the increased amount of equipment slots, and that the DS's native resolution was half of the PS2's. A smaller screen and softer hardware meant a need to pull the perspective back out to a top-down view, but not without acknowledging its faults. The rotation of the camera was now limited to about 180 degrees instead of the full 360. Doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that the change forced every level to be designed around that limitation. Every door needed to face the camera, pots and barrels couldn't be hidden behind walls or pushed into the corner of an alley. There were secret areas and hidden doors the player would have to discover by paying attention to the environments they were exploring. The camera rotation reinforced Dragon Quest IX's intentionally smaller scale and reduced the headaches and nausea suffered from using Dragon Quest VII's camera. No matter where you were or what it looked like, you knew that everything existed inside the limited scope available to you. Dragon Quest IX wanted to get that across vehemently. This was a pocket-sized Dragon Quest for your pocket-sized console. It was about the same length as most other Dragon Quests, but 9 segments were broken up into easily digestible, bite-sized pieces. Towns were smaller and faster to excavate. Dungeons were compact and short, perfect for clearing a scenario after school with your classmates or during your lunch break with coworkers. It was almost a callback to Dragon Quest IV's town and dungeon design. No mechanics, and that kinda sucks, but paced extremely well and filled with treasure to find. Dragon Quest IX has a lot of parallels with Tokiden 2, a game I covered about the mutual benefits of helping one another. You learn an important addendum in Dragon Quest IX while playing with your friends though. Receiving help doesn't mean you aren't pulling your own weight. Getting back to the observatory was only the first act. You spoke to Apis Major, basically the chief celestrian, the hold on, I can make it happen. Chiefestrian, nailed it. You learned you were the first of those who fell off the observatory to come back. Aquila was still missing, and the golden figs had been scattered across the mortal realm. With every other Celestrian working to repair the observatory, Apis Major declared it your duty to recover the figs, citing your lack of Celestrian features as a sign of prophecy. Wow. Racist. Dragon Quest IX, Act 2, saw you recovering the 7 sacred figs from the mortals who consumed and became corrupted by them. The subtext wasn't subtle. The golden figs represented apples of Eden, the forbidden fruit that corrupted humanity from the Adam and Eve story in the Bible. 7 figs for 7 sins, 7 situations to see solved in succession, and 7 stories to learn from. 7 mortals all in a place of power, and 7 sets of people they affect. A fishing town succumbed to sloth after the head fisherman became a leviathan to provide his daughter with enough fish that she'd never go hungry again. The haunting of an academy by the wrathful spirit of its previous headmaster, kidnapping students and forcing lessons down their throats. There was a recurring relationship much like the one you had during the opening sequence of the game, of master and apprentice, of the Almighty and the Celestrians, of the Celestrians and each other, and lastly, of the Celestrians and the mortals. Remember that at this point in the series, the children who played the original Dragon Quest on the Famicom were now parents. Remember that as a series, Dragon Quest told a very long lesson about the principles of family. Religious context aside, that was the core message. It began by asking a question. How does parenting work? A god to its people, a parent to their child, a player to their peers. What is the role of those with authority? How does one support the people under their care, and how much is too much or too little? The second act used the 7 deadly sins as catalysts for behavior gone too far, and reflected each sin in the townspeople you spoke to. Envious servants of the queen and greedy residents of a small village overlooked by a generous duchess. But you were also affected. With this kind of multiplayer, sometimes you were the authority, the player farthest into the story, now a guest player in someone else's world with knowledge of what comes next. Did you lead your friends by the hand instead of allowing them to discover on their own? Maybe you were the host player with the unique power to summon your friends to your side whenever you wanted. Did you pull them away from their own curiosity without asking, or were you totally negligent to their errands? How'd your friends react? How did you when you were on the other end of it? Dragon Quest IX wanted you to feel like the people you were meeting. It wanted to show you what that looked like and also have a way for you to experience your own version of it. And it made sure you would, even if you were playing by yourself. Dragon Quest IX was almost an entry made in a parallel universe where 8 didn't happen. It took the same elements in the series that 8 did and went in an opposite direction with it for a different purpose. And that's why it brought back Vocations. It wouldn't have been all that interesting if you and your friends were all the same exact character, would it? Vocations returned with a few important differences. You could change classes whenever you wished, like always, but unlike Dragon Quest VII, you couldn't keep the spells you learned. This was great for having classes to play as with friends who were at different levels or playing the same class you were. Because you couldn't keep spells from one class to the other, everyone was still required to fill certain roles. You needed a healer or a sturdy warrior that could soak damage for multiple turns. It kept things balanced by encouraging people to level up different classes on their characters when they were playing with someone else. But that didn't mesh with the concept of showing off the equipment you worked hard to get. You'd switch to a class that couldn't equip half the stuff you alchemized or bought. There needed to be a detail to Vocations that encouraged class switching in the same way. So, level 5 took the skill point system and made a separate set of skills for each class. Combined with Vocations, this is the best iteration of both these mechanics. I call it the Vocation skill system. I am original and smart. Unlike spells, the abilities and passive bonuses earned with skill points carried over into any class. And while you still needed the right weapon for some of those abilities, different classes shared different sets of weapons and the skill tree related to them. The skill points a mage had spent into wands carried over into the armamentalist, allowing them to continue reaping the fruits of their labor while still having a fresh start with a new class. This gently suggested players swap to a class that had a weapon they were already skilled in. It created a path they could follow without forcing any hard prerequisites like being a certain level first or needing skill points in a specific tree. In multiplayer, the Vocation skill system helped everyone bring something necessary to the table while allowing them to personalize their character mechanically. In single player, it personalized the party members players would create. Building your own party was back in Dragon Quest IX, and you could customize them as much as your main character. You can make your friends and eventually go crazy and talk to them as if they were real people. All right, Mike, it's up to you. You just gotta kill the metal slime this turn. Everything is dependent on you. Come on, you can do it. God damn it, Mike. You'll notice this is the first time I mentioned single player in this entire video. Like I said before, Dragon Quest IX was a multiplayer experience. Every new feature was meant to be played with friends or extend playtime well past the main plot of the story. You would eventually come across treasure maps while playing. They didn't lead to chests, though. Treasure maps hinted at different locations across the overworld that housed grottos, randomized dungeons of varying difficulty. They were a perpetual motion. You were always given a new treasure map for beating any grotto the first time, and there were thousands of treasure maps to have. The higher level the grotto, the more floors, the better the loot, and the more blue chests to open with your friends. And the harder the bosses. What a cool horsey! Oh. They weren't easy. You could access your first grotto about halfway into the second act, but the bosses were pretty damn demanding, even when you came back during the endgame. I've returned, horsey, and I've gotten stronger than the— I still can't fucking beat him. Are you serious? Grottos were for groups of players who either finished the main story or didn't want to advance it past a certain point while playing together. More importantly, though, they're the reason your 3DS has a Street Pass function. Dragon Quest IX had a special feature. It was called Tag Mode. In Tag Mode, your Nintendo DS would go into a sleep state and use its wireless capabilities to interact with other DSs nearby. When the device is connected, character data and items were given to each player. This included a copy of a treasure map from each of their own collection. With 8 million possible grotto combinations, Tag Mode became insanely popular and lucrative to players looking for the combination that provided the best treasure, experience, you name it. It became so popular in Japan, in fact, that they had to ban people from playing Dragon Quest inside department stores since people figured that's where they'd get the most hits. They had to cordon off entire spaces in front of the stores for players to interact and share maps without disrupting foot traffic. They even opened a real-life version of the inn you accessed Tag Mode from. And in case you doubted me, most of the people showing up every day? Adults, many with children who were also playing Dragon Quest. The Tag Mode feature was so successful at achieving its purpose that Hideki Konno, producer of the 3DS's hardware, said it was what inspired him to include the Street Pass function on the 3DS. So all of those Street Pass features you love on your favorite 3DS games, yeah, Dragon Quest. You're welcome. Now here's the problem. All of this was really popular in Japan. The multiplayer functions were commonly used and people were always playing and trading maps together in Japan. You would always get tagged by hundreds of people on any given day in Japan. Japan has a huge population density that lends itself really well to the multiplayer features of Dragon Quest IX. But this multiplayer Dragon Quest game for a global audience forgot that outside of Japan, finding someone who also played Dragon Quest IX in a 25-mile radius consistently was rare, and Dragon Quest IX couldn't do multiplayer over Wi-Fi. As a multiplayer game, Dragon Quest IX is great, but without the consistent source of people to play it with, those design choices intended for co-op become annoying nuances and missing features. All the fun digressions from entries past were gone. No monster arena, no Mori, no monster taming, no Mori, no town building, no casinos, no Pachisi, and no Mori. With friends, moving around the overworld was nigh problematic, but on your own, things got a little less than ideal. The great additions to the overworld from 8 were missing here. No notorious monsters to fight, no treasure chests sprinkled about this world that was ripe for them. Material locations you found weren't marked on the map. Backtracking to pick them up was a nightmare. You didn't bother getting familiar with the world itself. Time to boat was 19.5 hours, but you wouldn't be sailing for long. You were landlocked for most of the game, and none of the islands to visit were natural detours on the main path. Ugh, it's fine, it's just Dragon Quest VIII would have put a chest there. Dragon Quest VIII would have had good overworld elements. It's like a child talking to a divorced father. Dragon Quest VIII would have bought me ice cream. You didn't have much reason to change your character's class without the multiplayer party to worry about fitting into. The minstrel was a great support that was thematically appropriate, and the party members you had total control over could be molded however you wanted. But that didn't stop Dragon Quest IX from scaling down gained experience for lower-leveled characters. It was balancing meant for multiplayer, but in single player, it facilitated grinding and slowed players down whenever they changed classes. Alchemy was instantaneous now, but you couldn't alchemize anywhere you wanted to anymore. Since you had to access multiplayer from Patty's Pub, it made sense to put it there. You'd return from someone else's world and head straight to the pot to make things with what you came back with. But if you weren't doing that, having to go back and forth became a chore. Alchemy now required way more than just 2 or 3 ingredients. Fine if you were doing lots of multiplayer sessions, a mission to farm enough materials to make what you wanted to on your own. And like a lot of randomized dungeons, grottos by yourself were fun up to the point you fought all of the 12 possible bosses you could find in them. After that, it was rinse and repeat to farm for rare items and grind levels. Of course, there was tons of additional content you could access through the online service. An item shop with rotating offers, legacy grotto maps that took you through major boss fights from previous games, and VIP guests you might have recognized. But even so, it was easy to see why Level 5 made those things when you consider how playing with friends could go. They were thinking about balance and convenience for roaming players. But there's one feature that didn't fit in as either a multiplayer or single player feature: side quests. We've talked about the many ways Dragon Quest has offered additional content beyond the linear path, but there were never officially side quests. There was no list, no specific objective to do. You could just do things if you wanted to. You were like a kid with the amusement park all to yourself. What we called side quests in Dragon Quest IX were nothing like what you'd expect from the series. They're fetch quests. Boring MMO-styled fetch quests.
MMO quests for non-MMO mechanics. Do you see the complication that it's okay if you don't, I'm gonna explain it, but do you see you can't just...
So in addition to the normal NPCs in town, you could find NPCs with blue speech markers instead of white. These were NPCs with side quests you could accept and eventually complete for a reward. Most of them wanted you to bring back a specific alchemy material or monster drop.
Okay. I know some of you have been playing through this series since I started making these. Think about how often enemies drop items in Dragon Quest. Yeah, not often. Yeah.
Trying to complete these side quests amounted to grinding monsters or running around the overworld to pick up alchemy ingredients. The rewards were always either a different ingredient you could have gotten yourself or a nothing sum of gold that you could have easily obtained with 2 or 3 battles if you really needed to. Some were totally esoteric and kept you in the dark on how to complete them, offering no hints or direction. On top of 5, 6, 7 side quests popping up in every town you completed the story segment in, you were never given any notice when new side quests had appeared in locations you previously visited. If you did want to do these, you would blow right past them. Not that you'd be able to do all of them, since you could only accept 10 side quests at a time, and most were incompletable until much later than when they became available. But the worst part is that some of these side quests were related to unlocking new vocations. The requirements were so oddly specific that doing them in any reasonable fashion took a lot of work and sometimes plain old luck. Take the Armamentalist quest as an example. It required a party member to cast Wizard Ward and then deal the finishing blow to 3 metal slimes. An enemy with a high chance of running away from battle and could avoid damage extremely well in a scenario that required at least 2 turns to set up.
Do you know which class learns Wizard Ward? Mages. The starting class with the lowest attack stat.
Where did the charm go? What happened to the fun side story involving this fully rendered 3D model? Where's the side dungeon or the special boss that used the Armamentalist moveset? You didn't get anything, just an obtuse objective and a total waste of potential, and that wasn't Dragon Quest. The side quests of Dragon Quest IX didn't fit into the identity of the series at all. They felt tacked on to appease the MMO crowd this new handheld game was expected to attract. But these were slow burn problems. They simmered, boiled, and nagged on you to drag Dragon Quest IX down. As that collective nuisance grew, the storytelling of Dragon Quest IX took a nosedive. Following traditional Dragon Quest narrative, you'd think the game would have been over after finding all 7 figs, but it didn't end there. On recovering the last fig, Aquila confronted you and asked that he return them to Apis Major himself. Due to Celestrian natural order, you were powerless to refuse him, and just like you'd expect from a character who hadn't been around since the tutorial, he turned on you. Or did he? Aquila's allegiances were cloudy, and so was the third act. The introduction of an invading army that had been at war for decades and Aquila's double agency felt sudden and out of place in the narrative. A character only represented by name at the very start of the game becoming the final boss felt forced, as if the game realized there hadn't been a central antagonist to go after. If Dragon Quest IX was a different game, this wouldn't have registered. But this was a deflating storyline happening in tandem with rising grievances. It accidentally framed itself to look like the slow unraveling of a well-constructed thread. Luckily, that thread was held together by a strong core element. Tiny imperfections and last-minute fumbles weren't enough to ruin Dragon Quest IX's greatest strength.
Dragon Quest IX had the most engaging combat in the entire series.
Dragon Quest IX's combat was made to be more action-oriented. how exactly does one do that with a turn-based RPG? By adding so many factors through stats and equipment and skills that every turn refuses to play out the exact same way. Dragon Quest IX's battle system was a cut above the rest of the series because it gave enemies personality. They were capable of having several emotions during combat. They could get angry at a party member for reviving a fallen ally or landing a critical hit and target only them for a short time. They could become enthralled by characters with a high enough style and charisma stat, forcing them to skip a turn. Some bosses were even susceptible to status ailments that utterly destroyed them. Level 5 threw in practical changes to types of equipment. Staffs were renamed to wands and absorbed MP off of enemies during basic attacks, and shields all had a chance to block attacks now. Wait, what? They didn't already do that? Huh? 23 years and nobody thought about throwing that in there? Wow. Okay. Not every class could equip shields or have a high charisma stat, and additions like this provided every class with different benefits to take advantage of. Dragon Quest IX reworked how magic classes behaved, splitting magic into two different stats, magical mending and magical might. Now we had two different sets of equipment for magic casters and more room to build them down different paths. You could critical hit with magic now, even with healing spells, and the numbers behind buff and debuff spells were hidden away. Cryptic at first, but way better at telegraphing how many times any of those spells could be applied. Dragon Quest IX also got rid of outdated mechanics that plagued the series' battle system for decades. A player dying and being the only one in the group to not get experience points after a tough boss battle while the rest of their group reaped the full rewards could have incited a negative experience between friends. So in Dragon Quest IX, even dead party members earned experience if they participated in the battle. With the second screen, there was more space to provide more information to the player, so the combat HUD now displayed what each party member was going to do and who they were targeting. No more double healing someone because you forgot you already had the first character cast the spell. That happens to other people, right? It's not just me. I don't just have a terrible short-term memory.
Get this though. No more random battles.
For the first time in the series, monsters would now appear on screen in dungeons or the overworld and chase after you or run away depending on what level you were. For a turn-based RPG trying to be action-oriented, this was monumental. Here's why. Without random battles, players looked forward to combat. There's a huge difference between having a battle forced upon you by an invisible force and choosing to or knowing how the battle was triggered. You're running up to a chest or the exit of a room and you get hit with a random battle? Ooh, that's aggravating. You run into an enemy or start getting chased by one and can see them coming at you? Makes sense. Understandable. No big deal. With monsters visible in the world, players would actively choose to fight monsters they hadn't seen before. It allowed them to indulge in curiosity and have more control over the way they wanted to play. Personally, I think this solved a lot of balancing issues. I think people were likely to participate in battles more often simply because the decision was theirs, and that translated into them properly leveling their party, which is something the development team wanted you to do. Dragon Quest IX was supposed to be the hardest Dragon Quest ever made. Yuji Horii was quoted saying, "We made the game to be quite hard. It's harder than any of the previous titles, and the enemies are also powerful. We strengthened the bosses," stuff like that. But this was a lie, or at least unsuccessful. This monster's name is Manguini. If you named a monster in your video game Manguini, I don't think anyone's gonna be all that intimidated by it. He sounds like a giant pasta man. Dragon Quest IX wasn't difficult, and in that respect, they failed to achieve what they wanted. The effort didn't go to waste though. In their attempt to make a difficult Dragon Quest game, what they instead achieved was an exciting and transparent one. The sense of freedom Dragon Quest IX's battle system provided gave players options and added a level of uncertainty to every turn that glued their eyes to the screen. Watching one of your characters at low HP block a critical hit with their shield during a boss fight was something that made you shout excitedly. Oh my god, Mike! Mike, you fucking magical human being! You did it! Moments like that made battles memorable, and it were these changes that made those moments possible. There were new mechanics that meshed well with this concept of uncertainty. The coup de grace was a kind of super ability a character could gain related to their class in the heat of battle. They were insanely powerful abilities that could turn the tide of combat right when you needed them to, but you didn't have to use them right away. If you managed to enable the coup de grace on all 4 party members, an even more powerful ability was unlocked, the co-op de gras. Co-op de gras could grant invincibility or maximize the tension of everyone in the party. They broke the scales of balance and they weren't easy to get. Holding on to your coup de gras until you could get the co-op de gras was a big risk that yielded a big reward. They shifted your priorities in battle and had you focus on keeping different characters alive. Level 5 also added a combo multiplier for identical attacks made consecutively. It emphasized speed, and the party combinations that could abuse it would make up for the lack of variety in their abilities with raw attack damage. The psych-up system was totally reworked in Dragon Quest IX. Instead of every character being able to use their turn to raise their tension, only one person was allowed to egg them on to get the same result. You. Psyching up was replaced with the Egg On ability, a move unique to your main character, and one they couldn't use on themselves. This was a bigger investment now. It took 2 characters' turns to properly stack tension to the max, but it also let you constantly pump out low-level tension attacks one after the other. Egg On suited your main character's starting class, the Minstrel. Your character's role was not to provide healing or dish out high levels of damage. They existed to elevate the potential of party members instead of replacing the actions of those party members with their own.
Oh, I wonder if that was intentional.
Finally, we get to what it was all about, and by now I think you're able to put the pieces together yourself. We've been talking about authority and how to use it and the ways it can go bad. People don't need to be hand-fed or ruled over or constantly lectured to. They don't need a guardian angel to do everything for them. And I quote the game itself: "To lean on the crutch of another's power, as we have done, is to forget the honor and independence of our people." I always say Dragon Quest is about family, and Dragon Quest IX was about watching your kids grow up. The fisherman and his daughter, the king of Stornway and the princess, the almighty and the goddess. Every conflict in Dragon Quest IX dealt with the power struggle between a parent and their child. Beautifully represented by a cutscene where a tiny blue light intercepts a big red one. There was always someone rejecting the status quo, and always a remorseful authority figure coming to terms with their own intensity. For the children playing this game, this was meant as a wake-up call. It's okay for people like your parents and teachers to want to help you. It's okay to accept that help, but don't let them rule you. Don't let them do everything for you. Don't become complacent. For the parents playing Dragon Quest IX, and arguably the age group that would better understand what was being said, don't lead your flock to sin, and don't allow sin to consume you. Less metaphorically, don't forget who your children are. Now, you might not have to worry about your parents anymore. You might not be a parent. The lesson is still as potent when it comes to supporting your friends. Push them in the right direction, defend them when they can't defend themselves, be their muse if you need to, but never force them. Allow them to make mistakes. Allow them to make their own decisions. No matter how much you love them, care for them, want to protect them, and see them safe, allow them to be their own person.
We've come a long way since the first Dragon Quest, haven't we?
While it isn't the sophomoric single-player experience I wanted, Dragon Quest IX is pretty dope. It proved the series' versatility, showed people that it was capable of being more than a long single-player RPG and that there was more room to play around with in the formula. It was an ambitious undertaking that paid off really well despite lacking a ton of what the series was known for. On a development path, Dragon Quest VIII and IX are 2 branching paths in the same spot. 2 examples of what Dragon Quest can be. 2 deviations in the evolution of its design and where the series can go from here. I like to think Level 5 and Yuji Hoри's team realized that they could explore different concepts for a Dragon Quest game and use either as jumping off points for the next one.
And assuming I can get it to work, I will be covering the next one. Go ahead and ask me 1,000 times when it's coming out, I'm ready for it.
But since that's up in the air and Dragon Quest XI isn't coming out in my area for a while, let's do something fun. I'm gonna rank the Dragon Quest games in order of my favorites. Dragon Quest VIII is obviously going up in the #1 spot, big surprise there. Dragon Quest IV's chapter-based storytelling and constantly changing character perspective is too good. It's also the game with Torneko Taloon in it, so it takes second place, followed by Dragon Quest V. V's monster taming, its story of a heroic family unit, and the personality it brought to its characters characters became staples of the series. Those are the easy ones. Dragon Quest IX earns the 4th spot on the list, showing off a different kind of Dragon Quest while still retaining the series' identity. The battle system would have earned it a higher spot, but the trade-off of staple features I loved for ones that weren't that great burned me a little harder than I expected in most people. Dragon Quest III comes in at number 5. Sort of an early prototype for Dragon Quest IX, it's influenced every Dragon Quest after it in some way, and for a video game from 1988, still has a very compelling narrative. Dragon Quest II and I follow it at number 6 and 7. Time has been really kind to the first 2 Dragon Quest games, but they're still old games that exhibit old problems. Dragon Quest II is an amazing sequel, and Dragon Quest I is Dragon Quest. It's the first one, you can't hate on it. Dragon Quest VII follows them at number 8. Not a bad Dragon Quest game, but when you're 200 hours long and still have balance issues, that drags, that gets boring. I'm still mad I have to fight the final boss again for the post-game. And all the way at the bottom is Dragon Quest VI. Fuck that game, it's poopy, I don't like it.
Dragon Quest IX was a hybrid of sorts, a testing ground for ideas, and one thing was certain. People were happy to share their love of the series with others. After the global success of 9, Square Enix saw the potential in that. It was a potential they would later tap into, and the resulting entry in the series was a massive awakening. Until next time, my name's GC, and I hope you'll keep questing with me.